You're listening to the Fan to Fan podcast, and today we're giving you a ton of our personal recommendations from Land of the Lost, Kolchak the Night Stalker, Salem's Lot, and more. Here we go. Welcome to the Fan to Fan podcast. This is your host, Bernie Gonzalez, and I am here with friend, fan, and fellow podcaster, Pete Charbonneau. Pete, how's it going?
Bernie, fantastic. Thank you again so much for having me on the Fan to Fan podcast. It is a thrill, as always, to be here.
So in the last episode, Pete and I discussed a few different volunteer opportunities from Liberal Vox to the Hero Initiative and different organizations that we felt passionately about and thought that we'd share with you and at least give you some opportunities on how you could help your community. But in this episode, we're going to be a little less civic-minded and have a little bit more fun. So you've done your part for Queen and Country. Now it's time to kick back, relax, Netflix and chill with Bernie and Pete. So we've got some
coming with the jazzy bass lines as we.
Yes. This is the part where the bathrobe can come off. Yes.
Oh, good thing I'm wearing my Boba Fett underoos.
So we've got a few suggestions, Pete and I do, for ways to distract yourself. So if you're already volunteering, good on you. If we gave you some ideas, go run with them. But if you just want to kick back and relax and get some fun fan suggestions, that's what we're here for. And I think I'm going to just take the reins just to begin because we already kind of started talking about one, and that was Svengoolie.
Okay, sure.
It's something that I grew up on in Chicago, something that you said you recently discovered, but I remember very early on as I was dating what is now my wife and just mentioned, you know what, on Saturday nights, I have a standing appointment with a grown man who wears makeup, and his name is Rich Coase, who plays this part of horror host Svengoolie, and he has some movies that are tough to watch, and they're so bad, they're bad. But he has some classics on there that are just neat to rediscover. Some Universal monsters, some Abbott and Costello. There's been a run on some Godzilla films, but it's just kind of neat to be able to watch these movies. And with the addition of this extra layer of social media on there, like we've mentioned now a few times, connecting with like-minded people that can kind of riff in kind of Mystery Science Theater 3000 fashion on this movie, along with Svengoolie. It's just kind of neat to be able to always go back to this thing that may seem old school or archaic to some, but to me it's just kind of a fun distraction on Saturday nights to be able to say, oh, Svengoolie's on, let's check it out.
Sure. And now, does your wife watch with you?
Not even a little bit.
Not a little bit? Not even once in a while?
No. On occasion, I'll have to DVR it. I'll watch a little bit of it, and I'll just kind of finish it up later. Like I said, there's some movies that are really, really tough to watch, and I understand why she may wander away and all of a sudden start doing some household chores. We might get more dishes washed sometimes during Svengoolie than at other times.
Yeah, no, I don't blame her. Yeah, there's been a few painful ones that John and I have tried to sit through, and it takes a lot of intestinal fortitude to get through some of those. Lon Chaney Jr., Wolfman obviously being a classic, but he went on a run of Lon Chaney Jr. films that were kind of murder mysteries, but it seemed like he just played the same character in every single one. I'm like, I feel like I've watched this 6 times already.
And you guys are big on tweeting as the movies are on to make fun of the film, but also connect with other folks, because I've seen you guys pretty active on Saturday nights.
Yeah, I think for us, it's just, it's a good vehicle for us to kind of just get goofy and just try and think of bad puns and, just try to get some laughs out of people. And yeah, it kind of passes the time. It certainly passes the time when the movie is a bit of a stinker, but then the problem with that is when the movie's so bad, sometimes it's really difficult to even make fun of it. You're just kind of numb to what you're seeing on the screen, and you can't even. There's nothing even to make fun of. It's just, boy, this is painful. And sometimes you just have to say that, and sometimes you have to tweet a picture of the bourbon that you're drinking to try and get through through the last half hour of the movie. Again, and you can't plan these things, but there was one night, I don't remember what the movie was, but it was really one of those painful ones, and I tweeted out what I was drinking. I had the bottle, and I'm like, hey, sound off, what's everyone drinking to get through this one tonight? And we got a ton of responses from it. It was great. People were tweeting their craft beers, their whiskeys, vodka, whatever. that was one of the best responses we ever got. So it was nice to know that we were not alone in suffering through that week's episode.
Thank you for all those cards and letters.
There is nothing wrong with your TV set.
Yeah, he really was that skinny. Ew.
Very nice. So, all right, so I threw out the opening salvo with Sven Gulli, handing off the baton to you, Pete.
When we were talking about our topic for this week, I was trying to go back to things that I enjoyed, mostly when I was a kid. I was trying to, there's been so much pop culture and so many TV shows and so many movies and books and what have you that I've consumed in my 44 years of life that, trying to narrow it down to some of those things that really stood out was a little bit tough. But there's always going to be a few of those things. And one that just really resonated with me as a kid was the Sid and Marty Krofft 1974 Land of the Lost TV show. It was dinosaurs. It was, this otherworldly thing. It hit my child's psyche on so many levels. And of course, if you watch it now, it's completely cheesy. They're puppets. You've got Chaka, the little Pacu, I think was the name, the species of kind of simian monkey creature. The Sleestaks, which scared the crap out of me as a kid. That was one really effective piece to it. But there was just something about the family kind of being lost in a time rift in a world populated by dinosaurs and these fantastic creatures. And yes, even as a kid, I kind of knew that it was like a kind of a cheesy set. But, you buy into that stuff. And I would play Land of the Lost with my friends in the woods across the street. I remember distinctly, because my imagination was crazy as a kid, that I wondered if I were to break the television set while Land of the Lost was on, if I were to crack, the screen, could I crawl into the TV and actually be on the show? And that was an actual thing that I thought. I never broke the television, though I knew enough not to do that, because I probably would not be here talking to you right now. But there was just something about that show that captured my imagination on so many levels. I loved it. I will still watch an episode if I can. I don't think I have any. For a while I had a VHS tape of a few episodes, but I don't think I do anymore. But just, and some actually really good sci-fi writers, I believe at the time, worked on that show. They brought out concepts that were a little bit deeper than a kid's Saturday morning TV show. And Sid and Marty Krofft did a lot of cheesy shows like Sigmund and the Sea Monsters, Far Out Space Nuts with Bob Denver, Post Gilligan. A lot of these really H&R Puffin stuff.
Yep.
They were these really kind of 70s drug-fueled, psychedelic, crazy shows. But Land of the Lost, while being part of that family, there was a little something extra there with the sci-fi, and I just really enjoyed it. I have so many good memories from it. Yeah, it stands up. Well, I wouldn't say it doesn't stand up. It stands up in entertainment value.
No, I remember Marshall Will Holly, and if I'm right, wasn't it in the beginning of the third season, Rick Marshall, the dad, ends up finding the portal to return, and somehow I think it's his brother. They kind of port at the same time, so that way the uncle is now there with the kids in Chaka. So it kind of continues the show, so that there's still this father figure.
Right, and for anyone that might not know, it's got a great catchy theme song, Marshall, Will, and Holly on a routine expedition.
Met the greatest earthquake ever known. High on the rapids, it struck their tiny raft and plunged them down 1,000 feet below. To the land of the lost.
And so they're just in a raft, and they fall down this waterfall, and they end up in the land of the lost, and they spend the series trying to find a way back home. And yes, like you said, I think it might have been the end of the second season. The dad is able to find a way through the portal back, and then his brother, played by Ron Harper, who was also on the Planet of the Apes TV series, is now brought in. And that last season, I remember not liking nearly as much. The first 2 seasons, they were like living in a cave that was like up on a cliff, and they would have to run away from the dinosaurs who all had different names. Like Grumpy was the Tyrannosaurus, and Alice was the Allosaurus. There was Dopey, who I think was the Brontosaurus, and Spike, the Triceratops. The fact that I'm able to recall this right now from memory, I'm scaring myself.
Very impressive.
Really, I'm a little bit frightened right now. But again, the idea that they had to live in a cave when you were 5, 6, 7 years old, that's amazing. I got to live in a cave and there's dinosaurs roaming around outside. This is great. Sign me up. Why can't I live in the land of the lost? So one other piece of trivia, one of the Sleestaks was played by Bill Laimbeer, the famous Detroit Piston, who I believe was in college at the time. I can't remember where he went to college, but he played one of the Sleestaks on the show.
He would have been the tallest one.
Yes, and that was the other insane thing about the show. There was one Sleestak that could talk. They would just kind of walk around. They were like these lizard creatures. People out there, if they haven't seen the show, might remember the Will Ferrell movie that came out that was just horrible.
Yes.
Nothing to do with the TV show. But there was one named Enoch who he thought that he was from the future. He thought he was like an evolved species of Sleestak. And one of the poignant episodes, he was also trying to find his way back. And he thought that he had come from the future and these were his ancestors. But there was a twist episode where he realizes that he is actually from the past. And the Sleestak devolve from what he is to what they become on the show. And he was like I think Enoch was very depressed in that episode when he came to realize that. It was a little bit of a mind fuck. But again, something that you wouldn't normally see on kids' Saturday morning TV, dealing with a theme like that. That was kind of a heady thing for when you're 5 years old. So I very much appreciate Land of the Lost.
I'll say, to echo the Land of the Lost, this will be my suggestion for anyone looking for a good distraction. Our podcast, and one of the podcasts that I enjoy a great deal is the Retroist podcast, where they go over a lot of these things that we grew up with, including Land of the Lost, in some very loving detail, and talk about not just the production, but the merchandise and everything that revolved around everything from Land of the Lost or He-Man or the Twilight Zone or Kolchak the Night Stalker, things that you and I have both talked about that you and I love. But it's just a good way to connect with some of these shows, cartoons, movies that we grew up with. And for maybe 30 to 50 minutes, you kind of get a nice, fun refresher about what you loved about the show, what happened with the show, and some really good trivia, things that you would have easily forgotten or would have never known. But again, podcasts, great way to just kind of spend some time, especially like you and I are designers, so we have sometimes the ability to just play either music or listen to something in the background while we're working. Podcasts are a great way to discover some of these things. And I'll throw another one out there, the Pop Culture Happy Hour, that's run through NPR. Very thoughtful, educated discussions on pop culture issues. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'm the same as you. It's interesting. I used to be all about listening to music while I worked. And I still do that to a decent extent, but I find myself listening to podcasts much more now while I'm working, and I'm not sure why that is, because you need to kind of concentrate on listening, whereas music can sometimes just kind of drift in the background while you're working. But one of the podcasts that I swear by is How Did This Get Made?, which I just find brilliantly funny almost each episode, and they hit on a lot of movies that that we've grown up enjoying or not enjoying, and they kind of take them apart. They'll have guest stars. It's hosted by Paul Scheer and June Diane Raphael and Jason Mantzoukas, and then they'll have people in the comedy business come on. They kind of assign them the movie, and then they do a lot of live shows out of Largo in LA. Sometimes they'll do stuff from the studio, and they'll bring in people like Scott Aukerman, and I think Kumail Nanjiani was on the most recent one, which I told John that we need to watch. They did an episode on this movie Airborne, which I think was Jack Black's first film role, or one of his first film roles, and I remember watching it as a kid, and it's horrible. It's like a 90s surfer, inline skating, and hockey movie, and they can't make up their mind as to, pick one sport, so they just dumped all three, and just a really unlikable leading actor kid that is you want to root for him to fail throughout the entire movie.
Now, he has one chance to prove himself. One final race to win. And he's the one who has what it takes to put them over the top. Airborne.
I think I'm starting to like Cincinnati.
But they take on things, they've done The Room, they've done any bad movie you can think of. Sometimes they're actually decent movies. I think every time a Fast and Furious movie comes out, they have Adam Scott come on and they actually talk about how they legitimately love those movies and how great they actually are. Just, great fun. At the end, they end up reading like 5-star Amazon reviews from people for the movies. And I have laughed out loud many, many times listening to this. I'll listen to it in the car if I'm going somewhere. I get really excited if it's a movie that I know and I kind of want to hear their take on it. It's insanely entertaining.
All right, so how many podcasts do you think you subscribe to, just out of curiosity?
I try to keep it down just because, like a lot of people, my storage limit is getting close to the edge on my phone. I tend to go through episodes. I subscribe to that one, How Did This Get Made? I listen to Real Time with Bill Maher. I have a couple of NPR ones. And I get like a random mishmash of podcasts. There's a couple of history ones, Serial, some comedy, Bang Bang. The Retroist I don't subscribe to, but if there's an episode that comes up that piques my curiosity, I'll certainly stream it and listen to it. So my podcasting library is fairly random at this point.
Pete and I will continue our conversation in just a few seconds, but in the meantime, remember you can find the Fan to Fan podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan to Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN, or on Twitter at Fan to Fan Podcast. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out, send the message, and let me know what you think of the show. Thanks.
And now, on with the show.
All right, so let's go on kind of like a back-to-back shot here for any TV shows, movies, or anything you want to throw out there. So I'll start with Samurai Jack, just because that is returning in 2017. I love the 52 episodes that were out there, first 4 seasons. 5th season is starting up on Adult Swim, a show that has influenced me artistically, something that I would highly recommend to anyone that wants to enjoy something that they can look back to, but also look forward to something new being released this year. Great.
Yeah, I haven't, that Samurai Jack is something that I have not had the chance to delve into, but
I think you would enjoy it, Pete. I think you would.
I'm always open. Anything that you recommend, I always try to at least dip my toe into, because we are on such a similar wavelength that I need more to consume more pop culture. As much as I've already consumed,
there's always room for more. I'll take you to something else we've both have agreed on, and that's Kolchak the Night Stalker.
Oh, yeah.
A show that is completely, it's given a ton of credit if you talk to Chris Carter, who created The X-Files, or Eric Kripke, who created Supernatural. But back in 1972, before I was on this earth, and in 73, there were these 2 made-for-TV movies that still hold the records for made-for-TV movie ratings. And Kolchak, The Night Strangler, and The Night Stalker, which turned into a 20-episode series that was canceled all too soon. It was a terrific show that I discovered in college. I loved it, found it on DVD the second it was released, and I've probably worn that DVD set down as far as I can. But anytime I talk to anyone that remembers it, I appreciate it and just enjoy the show so much. Mm-hmm. I know it's something that you've mentioned that you've enjoyed.
I have, and I must have seen, and we talked about this briefly, but I think I must have seen one of the made-for-TV movies. It was the one about the vampire. And I remember as a kid when Kolchak, I think it was towards the end, he he's trying to uncover the plot, and he goes into the vampire's apartment and he opens the refrigerator, and there are these giant jars of blood.
That's right.
And I just thought that was like really, it was like a modern take on like, oh, sure, instead of, a gallon of milk, the vampire's just got, his mason jars full of blood for when he comes home from a long night of stalking and
clubbing.
Drinking the blood of others. Yeah, and clubbing, of course. Yeah, I mean, to round it out, you got to do a little clubbing. But it was weird because that was another show I remember watching as a kid, and then for years it was out of my conscious as I moved on to other things. And when it started to make a little bit of a revival, I was always getting confused. I'm like, did this show actually exist? Or am I misremembering it with Kojak because they sounded so similar? But I knew that it wasn't Telly Savalas, like, who loves you, baby? I knew that he wasn't on the show, and I remember Darren McGavin, it caused no great amount of confusion in my young brain as to, did I misremember this? Did this show really happen? And then I think it was during one of the Monster Week things that would happen growing up in New York where, and you may have had this in Chicago too, there would be like the week where every day at 4 o'clock they'd show a different monster movie for the week. And I think Kolchak, one of the episodes or one of the TV movies was one of the week's features. And so I'm like, oh yeah, I remember this. And then when gotten older now that we can go back and actually watch the episodes again and delve into the one with the werewolf on the cruise ship is just, that's good TV right there.
That's right. And it's on Netflix. I know it's on MeTV, which also is the same network that has Svengoolie. So it's available. It's out there to find. And it's at least worth watching a few episodes of just so you can see Darren McGavin, maybe better known for being the father in A Christmas Story.
It's a major award.
It's a great show.
And he's so good in it, too. He's like the world-weary reporter. No one ever believes him. And, he's kind of like the surrogate in a way because he's not always quick to believe, what's happening, but he's open to the supernatural stuff. So, when you're watching it, you're like, yeah, why doesn't anyone believe Kolchak? And, he's like, the evidence is right there. And this episode is when his editor is finally going to, take him at his word. And it never seems to happen. But, still he fights on. And I thought that was pretty unique and interesting for a guy that was, however old he was at the time, like a 50-year-old something leading man in that TV show, but still capturing the imagination of a kid at that point.
May I introduce myself? My name is Kolchak of the Daily Chronicle.
Kolchak reports the bizarre, the supernatural, the unexplainable.
You again is another crazy story. This nut thinks he is a vampire. He has killed 4, maybe 5 women. I saw that so-called super killer wipe up the streets with your so-called police force.
They don't want any help from amateur bloodhounds like you.
I've been a reporter for 22 years. I've been a police officer for 30. Well, then why don't you retire?
Darren McGavin, the Night Stalker.
Oh, boy. One thing that I've loved since I was a kid, and you don't really see it much anymore, sometimes for good reason, but it's the Our Gang / Little Rascals shorts.
Oh, sure.
I am an unabashed mega fan of those. I think they're brilliant. I know that a lot of gets thrown out of some of the racial overtones of it, but I will defend the making of them, and I will defend the existence of them in the fact that they portray kids being kids, and that was how they were filmed, and that was the intent. You don't get any racism out of the actual child actors. I think, obviously there are some stereotypes with, some like the characters like Buckwheat and Farina that are very cringeworthy if you were to look at it today, but they're very much a product of their time in the early 20s through the 40s, I think they went. But just some of the most incredibly funny scenes when you've just got kids acting like kids and putting contraptions together. The scene when they build like this giant go-kart and they're flying down the street and it's got like a little arm lever with a boxing glove on it, and as they're driving by they're just like punching men in the head and they're going flying. I mean, it's just...
Where's the brakes? It ain't got no brakes, it's freewheeling.
You never know what they're going to do next. It's the Little Rascals.
I can't get enough. I actually have a book written by Leonard Maltin, the famous movie critic, that kind of chronicles the history of pretty much every short film of our gang and the Little Rascals. And I was always just fascinated by it, the idea of kind of filming kids and just letting them play on camera for the most part, and kids just acting like kids normally would.
And at a time, I think when it was released, it was pretty groundbreaking because it was black and white kids playing together at the same time, but there was no segregation. They were just kids as equals playing around.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they were all basically Depression era poor kids. You know, you occasionally would have like Waldo or someone that was like the rich kid that would move in, but he was always kind of like the antagonist of that episode, as the other kids kind of had to band together to foil him in some way. That, you know, all the other rascals together, they had like the clubhouse together. Yeah, it was just everyone was on equal footing, and they were just kids being kids. And, you know, Spanky, when he was a baby, some of the funniest episodes that I have ever seen, and he stole the show. It's like mesmerizing. Even some of the silent ones, they just had like really interesting child actors that they were able to capture something with. And I credit Hal Roach, who is kind of the mastermind behind all that he had like this vision. And, you know, I'm sure that there's some unseemly things. There were no real child labor laws back then, but I think even so, they were on set, or at least on the lot, with tutors. You know, I know that they worked some with Laurel and Hardy, and it was just a fascinating time because it was like really the start of filmmaking. You know, film had been around for a little while at that point, but still very much early days in terms of, you know, how you would put that together. And I don't know, just an interesting piece of cinematic history for the country. And
how?
Remarkable. You stop saying remarkable.
And just like Land of the Lost, do not confuse the Land of the Lost show with the 2009 Will Ferrell movie. Do not confuse Little Rascals with the really bad 1994 movie.
Oh yeah. And I'm not sure. I know that those episodes, like the original Little Rascals and Our Gang episodes, are really difficult to come by. There might be some on YouTube. And I know that there was the rumor, and I'm not sure if this was true or not, but that Bill Cosby had bought up the rights to them because of the depiction of the black kids at the time. I don't know if that was an urban legend or not, but I do know that they are kind of difficult to track down, and I'm not sure what the rights are of them at this point. I know you can sometimes...
They're owned by CBS now.
Oh, they are? Okay.
Yes, yes, just like they own the Twilight Zone. So I wonder if it's just a case where they don't have, they don't feel like there's an audience to distribute it.
Yep. I'll have to look that up. It's kind of a shame because I feel like it's really faded from a lot of the public consciousness at this point, and I understand why. But again, like, I really feel like if you look at it objectively, you know, it's a product of its time, and yes, it's not America at its best as far as the depiction of black children and black people in it. But I really feel like it was done innocently, and I mean, who am I to say? I'm a suburban white kid, so I may not be one to speak on that, but I really feel, and from what I've read as well, I think is kind of what backs it up on me. I know interviews with some of the actors, they never felt any of that discrimination or racism. They're the ones that kind of came out with the quotes of, you know, they were just letting us kids play as kids, and there was no hierarchy. They were all part of the same gang, and everyone was equal. And I don't know, there was just a lot of entertainment in those shorts.
All right, what else you got, Pete? Maybe something that's not in black and white.
Well, you got the double barrel Buck Rogers and Battlestar Galactica, the original series.
Oh, 70. Very nice. Let's move to an era of color.
as we move into an era of color, if not good special effects.
And great hair.
And great hair. Oh, fantastic hair.
In the year 1987, NASA launched the last of America's deep space probes. Aboard this compact starship, a lone astronaut, Captain William Buck Rogers, was to experience cosmic forces beyond all comprehension. In a freak mishap, his life support systems were frozen by temperatures beyond imagination. Ranger 3 was blown out of its planned trajectory into an orbit 1,000 times more vast. An orbit which was to return Buck Rogers to Earth 500 years later.
Coming off of Star Wars in the late 70s, it was, as a kid, you were just craving more of that. So Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers fit the bill, and I don't think either of them made it past 2 seasons. It's one of those, when you look back on it, it feels like that took up a lot of my viewing at that age, but it really didn't, because, like I said, like neither of them lasted more than 2 seasons, so it wasn't like there was, like a 50-episode arc to them. They were probably under 20 episodes a piece. Yeah, and the special effects, really not much to write home about, but that's just wheelhouse for coming out of Star Wars and the whole phenomenon of Star Wars, and God damn it, I loved both of those shows for what they were.
And I have to mention Erin Gray, who, as a prepubescent kid, was probably one of my first loves. Mm-hmm. She was on Silver Spoons, then after that. But Buck Rogers, that's where I will always kind of remember her from, and that she made that show even better for a show that already had my attention. It's in the future. It's got these incredibly cheesy sci-fi effects, and to throw in Erin Gray, it's almost unfair.
and lest we forget Pamela Hensley, who played Princess Ardala on it too.
Yes.
Who then went on to play CJ. I don't remember her last name, in the the Magnum PI knockoff Matt Houston in the 80s, which is another guilty pleasure of mine. But, 2 just incredibly beautiful women on that show. And, again, like, prepubescent hormones are flying. It's like you want to tune in because it's sci-fi and it's space and there's lasers, but then it's like, well, maybe I think I want to tune in for Erin Gray and Pamela Hensley, too. And
she was in The Nude Bomb, wasn't she? With Get Smart movie that was from the 80s?
Yes. Wow, Good call. Totally forgot about that.
It wasn't a very good movie, but considering that, also grew up with Maxwell Smart, to see Don Adams kind of, redo the role, it was like, oh, this is neat. Not a very good movie, but oh, wow, I remember her from Buck Rogers.
Yes. And I was always disappointed, even at the time, and I have Buck Rogers. I have the complete series on DVD. The first season was kind of interesting. Again, like super cheesy. There's one episode where they've got these dancers on roller skates and they've got glow-in-the-dark lights lining their skates. It's like so disco. It's really of its time and it's really, really bad. But the episodes had something to them. And then for whatever reason, I guess because maybe ratings, they decided to kind of reconfigure it for season 2, and it went from Buck Rogers being on Earth in the 25th century to he's on almost like a Star Trek. Didn't look like the Enterprise, but the mission was the same. Like they were out like in space trying to find other worlds and things like that. And Wilma was on the show, but she was kind of like secondhand, and they always kind of played up like a bit of a romance in the first season, and then the second one, it just made them like strictly platonic friends, and it was just really kind of dull. They introduced the one guy, Hawk, who looked like a hawk. He had like feathers on his head. I guess he was supposed to be like the exciting new addition, but he really wasn't. It was really a disappointing second season, and I'm not sure if it even made it all the way through. I think they might have canceled it midway through the second season, but if you do want to check out this show and you haven't, I would stick to the first season. It's way more entertaining.
And I always remember Tom Christopher, who played Hawk, because he was in a ton of kind of like so bad they're bad but fun to watch movies. He was in Deathstalker 3, Street Hunter. I mean, just some terrible movies. But he was so good in Buck Rogers, but he always had kind of like this New York feel to him. And I didn't know until many years later that he actually was from New York. So it's kind of interesting to see him as this sort of like Hawkman, type character who was very serious, and he was very much the warrior. But with a not so subtle New York Queens New York accent. So.
Yeah, always good. And the other thing that I like about the first season too, you've got some guest stars on there that were like staples of 80s TV, like Gary Coleman guest starred on an episode. Marky Post from Night Court was on an episode. So if you're looking to kind of reminisce and see some of those TV stars, some of them before they were famous and some of them kind of like to, I guess, to cash in on their fame at the time, it's good for that too.
Hey, Sid Haig was in it.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Dennis Haysbert was in an episode. I think he may have been actually in a few episodes, but I remember Gary Coleman. Frank Gorshin, who played the Riddler in the 66 Batman series, was in a few episodes as well. Like you said, Marky Post. Just characters, character actors that we kind of grew up with that kind of floated through some of these series. And you mentioned Battlestar Galactica.
And Battlestar Galactica, which was just cheesy fun. They try to make that more serious. Buck Rogers, I think, was a little more lighthearted. Battlestar Galactica tried to deal with like the serious, some serious themes. And obviously, if anyone has seen the much more successful reboot, same basic premise. They're trying to find what ends up being Earth, and they're fleeing the Cylon tyranny. But I think the thing that dragged that show down, well, I know that it was the production values kind of spelled its demise because it was so expensive to produce a weekly episode that it just became not cost effective to keep doing it. And painfully obvious now if you watch an episode that they just kept reusing the same space battle scenes between the Cylons and the Vipers. They would just sometimes they would just kind of flip the screen. So instead of the Cylon veering off to the right and getting blown up, it would veer off to the left and get blown up, and just a lot of recycling that was just really obvious. And it's a shame because you had some good actors on that show. Dirk Benedict, who obviously went on to fame with the A-Team, Richard Hatch, Lorne Greene as Commander Adama.
The final annihilation of man.
Fleeing from the Cylon tyranny, the last Battlestar Galactica leads a ragtag fugitive fleet on a lonely quest, a shining planet known as Earth.
I'll say, as much as I loved Battlestar Galactica as a kid, I think I associate it now with a Mystery Science Theater movie, Space Mutiny. Have you ever seen that?
I've not seen Space Mutiny.
Okay, Space Mutiny, probably top 5 Mystery Science Theater movies ever released. And they actually had purchased some of the footage from the Battlestar Galactica series and played it in the movie. So first time I saw that movie, I saw Space Mutiny and I thought, wow, these guys are so brazen. They literally just took footage from Battlestar Galactica and put it into their movie, just to find later, kind of going through Mystery Science Theater trivia, that they paid for the rights. So you think the studio, was only more than happy to say, well, if we can reuse this footage a number of times in every episode of Battlestar Galactica, let's let other people use it too in their sci-fi operas. Why not? Let's just get as much mileage as we can out of this.
It sounds like a Roger Corman story that I heard where he struck a deal with some movie studio. He made a film called The Fast and the Furious back in the 50s, I think. It's like a drag racing movie. But when the producers of the current Fast and the Furious franchise wanted to make the Fast and the Furious, they realized that the title had been taken. And so they contacted him. And Roger Corman, still being the proficient producer and filmmaker, maybe not as proficient as he once was, but is still churning out movies, was working on some movie based in ancient Rome. It was like there was like a Cyclops involved, I think. And they talked to him about this and like, hey, look, we want to make this movie, The Fast and the Furious. You've got the rights to the name. We've talked to our lawyers, and we're pretty sure that we can do this, but as a courtesy, we want to ask for your permission. Is there can we do a deal here? And Roger Corman said, he's like, listen, I need some establishing shots. I don't have the budget for it. He's like, if you give me some footage of some picture that they had done and allow me to use that footage, just establishing shots, he's like, you can have the name for Fast and the Furious. And they're like, okay, deal. And he's like, I think they may have got the better end of that deal.
That's the most Roger Corman story I've ever heard. That makes perfect sense. Pete and I will conclude our conversation in just a few seconds. But in the meantime, remember, you can find the Fan to Fan podcast at www.fanpodcast.com. Facebook, just search Fan to Fan Podcast. That's FAN, the number 2, FAN. or on Twitter at Fan2Fan Podcast. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out, send the message, and let me know what you think of the show. Thanks. You got anything else you wanted to throw out there?
Yeah, I was going to tie in book and movie/TV movie. Something, again, that I just was fascinated as a kid would be Salem's Lot, the TV movie and the Stephen King novel, both of which I love. And the novel is one of those, probably my favorite Stephen King book that I still will go back and revisit from time to time. There's something about it. I think just the idea of discusses the nature of evil and, vampires in, a small Maine town.
If you thought you could never be frightened by a television movie, watch what happens to the citizens of Salem's Lot. Is something evil killing the people in Salem's Lot, or are they killing each other?
Run! No!
A terrifying 3-hour special movie presentation Tuesday. Watch it with someone you trust.
And I'm sure that I saw the TV movie before I read the book, but the book always interested me because there are some subtle differences. I don't want to give away too much, but spoiler alert. In the TV movie, the vampire is played by Reggie Nalder, who's like a bald, older gentleman who's got some really creepy features before the makeup is applied. And in the TV movie, he doesn't speak. He's just literally a monster. He's a hideous-looking vampire creature. And James Mason, who plays Straker, is kind of his caretaker. He's the one that gets him to America, and he opens up this antique shop in this town where they're going to kind of establish their base of operations in this decrepit old house. He's kind of the ringmaster, and he says all the... he does all the speaking. And in the book, it's kind of the opposite. Like, Straker is kind of this plotting... He's human, and he's still kind of the caretaker, but he doesn't really speak, I don't think, much at all. He's more just kind of the muscle and the heavy, whereas Barlow, who is the vampire, is kind of the debonair Bela Lugosi. He's, he speaks, he taunts the protagonists in the book, and I always found that really interesting. Having, seen the movie first, I had this very distinct vision and picture of what it was. But, for a TV movie, it scared the crap out of me as a kid. There was just some great special effects with the eyes that they gave the vampires in it, and some use of kind of reverse filmmaking where they've got like this kid who's one of the first ones to be turned, or I think maybe the first one turned into a vampire, is floating above one of the protagonists, this kid Mark, who is a huge horror movie fan. He creates dioramas with the Universal monsters, and he's kind of like the outcast kid. He's not really understood, and he's befriended by David Soul, who's the other protagonist who people might remember from Starsky and Hutch. And it just, I don't know, it was, I guess it was a mini-series that was condensed to a TV movie, and it's just really well done. Like I said, like, really scary vampire in it, some really great themes, and it just got like a really creepy feel to it. And especially with the book, I don't know if it's made apparent as much in the TV movie, but in the book for sure, like, even though they kind of win the day, like, the vampires are still there at the end. Like, it's not one of those, like, you kill the main vampire and everyone reverts back to a human. And that's one of the things I think I loved about the book, was that there's a lot of Stephen King writes, the beginning and the end are kind of like these dispatches from newspaper clippings, and it talks about how so-and-so's, these disappearances going on, and no one can seem to figure out what's going on, but by the end of the book, that it's vampires. And I don't know, it's something struck me, and I would read that by the light of the day. At night, it would spook me, and so it was one of those books, along with The Exorcist, that I would only read until about like 7 o'clock at night, and then after 7 o'clock, when the sun went down, I wanted no part of scaring myself to death. So
I remember the 70s movie. Did you ever see the TNT 2-part movie with Rob Lowe?
I didn't. I meant to, but I didn't, and I would actually be curious in checking that out, because I heard that it was actually supposed to be decent.
I'm wondering I didn't read the books. I'm wondering from someone who has. You'll have to check it out and let me know if that's one to that's even worthy of checking out, or if I should really just go back and revisit the 70s one, because I do remember the design, the look of the vampires. It had like this underwater feel to their skin where it was blue, but their eyes were very amber, very yellow.
Yeah.
And they just had a very striking look. So I'm wondering what they did in the 2000, whatever it was, TNT series, if they were faithful to the book, which you might appreciate, or if they just kind of went more for style over substance.
Yeah, good question. I'll have to check that out. And you just reminded me, one of the creepiest scenes in the 70s miniseries / TV movie, the caretaker is bitten and he dies, and so there's this older gentleman that I'm trying to remember. I think he's a professor or he's a teacher in the town. And so he's sitting at home just kind of reading, and all of a sudden he hears like a creaking coming from upstairs, like someone rocking back and forth in the chair. And he's, really great build up, like he slowly goes up the stairs. You can tell like there's some dread on his face. He walks into the bedroom where this caretaker guy had been staying. I don't know if he was boarding with him or whatnot. And you just see him with his head down, like slowly rocking in the chair, and it's so creepy. And then he finally just stops rocking and picks his head up. And again, like you said, like they've got like these really weird contacts for the eyes for the vampire, and his eyes start like glowing. And then he just like inhales with his fangs, and it's just kind of one of those like. And when he speaks, it's like this breathless whisper. It is so creepy and so effective, and it scared the shit out of me when I was a kid, but it's so well done. And again, especially, this wasn't like a rated R, in theaters film. This was a miniseries created for TV, and I thought for what it was incredibly spooky.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go back and watch Salem's Lot, because I have heard a few Stephen King interviews, and I think I remember he said how he thought Salem's Lot in his mind was one of the favorite books that he's written. So he's got quite a lot in his library. So to say that was that, I'm like, I have to go back and revisit the movie, let alone maybe pick up the book and check it out.
I definitely recommend it. If you're a fan of horror movies, if you're a fan of Stephen King, I know some people can take or leave him, but there's no doubting that he's a extremely prolific writer. I would, like I said, it's my favorite of his. Not that I've read all of his work, but of the stuff that I have read, it's easily my favorite book of his. So if you have any inkling to read Stephen King, or you have read him and maybe haven't experienced his entire catalog, I would definitely recommend it. It's really well done. It's concise. It doesn't get too, sometimes he can kind of go off on some tangents. It's a focused work. So.
Very cool. And it's I think revisiting some of those like late 70s, early 80s movies are kind of fun to watch, and just kind of, some of them are really bad, but some of them are just kind of fun to see how they might have been limited by budget or by ability, especially compared to what they can do now. But you get a good appreciation. It's kind of like watching, like you mentioned, Buck Rogers or Battlestar Galactica, and saying, yeah, it's a little cheesy, but it still looks kind of neat. And my younger, much more innocent version definitely appreciated it. So
right, and I actually have an episode of Buck Rogers on in the background now, just to get me in the mood for the episode here. But it's just interesting, the little things that you pick out. Like there's a scene he's battling this bald, I think it's this guy. I think he was called Tiger Man on the show. It's almost like a Star Trek, like Captain Kirk versus a Klingon, thing. There's like weapons involved, but there's really not a whole lot of, physicality happening here. And yet, when there's a shot from behind, it's so clearly obvious that it's a body double and a stuntman for Gil Gerard as Buck Rogers, and it's kind of baffling because he's not doing anything other than like a half-hearted roundhouse kick. I'd like to think that Gil Gerard could have managed that.
He was saving his energy, all right, Pete? Don't you judge that man. He's a treasure.
Maybe he pulled a hamstring. I don't know. I guess we'll give him the benefit of the doubt.
That's right. All right, what do you think?
I'm good. I could always keep going, but those are the main ones that I wanted to hit. Do you have any others?
I've got a list, but I feel like maybe this is we'll have to do a part 2 because between Batman the Animated Series, Deadwood, Twilight Zone, Firefly, I've got a ton more. I'm like, oh, maybe this will be kind of fun to revisit in a few weeks and just kind of go back to some of these guys and think of some new ones.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, because I was trying to run the gamut of cartoons and other things, and so I had like Thundar the Barbarian, and this series of books like the Three Investigators I used to read as a kid. They were like Alfred Hitchcock Presents books. They were kind of like a slightly younger version of like Hardy Boys books. I really loved those growing up too, so I was going to talk about that. So yeah, we can save that for a part 2 and get into some more of these guilty pleasures or what have you, recommendations.
Good. Okay. Let's say, because then we could go over some of these guys, and it'll give me some time to think of a few more. But I think we could probably come up with another episode of Guilty Pleasures Part 2. That's a good way to call it.
Yeah, easily. Like I said, I had to start paring it down because you start going down the rabbit holes. I started thinking about, I was even, it's funny you mentioned Aaron Gray and Silver Spoon, so I'm like, that was another one of my guilty pleasures.
Silver spoons together, we are together. We are find our way together,
taking the time each day
to learn all about those things you just can't find.
2 silver spoons together, you and I.
That's it for this episode. Tune in next time for more fan-to-fan conversations on the Fan-to-Fan podcast. Thanks for listening.
I trust we will meet again. It has been so nice meeting you.